The house that still exists, they say. Some houses never die. That wood rots, bricks crumble, families vanish, but the idea remains. And if an idea is dark enough, useful enough, and profitable enough, it becomes more than a house. It becomes a system. This is not a story about the past. This is not a story about a basement. This is a story about you. And we are now in the final room. Let's begin with what you haven't been told. April 13th, 2006. A boy is found in rural West Virginia, wandering barefoot near the ruins of an old psychiatric site. He has no memory of his name, no record of birth, no history in any database. But he speaks in full sentences, quotes Latin, and responds to the name, architect. The attending physician, Dr. Karen Redmont, makes a private note in her file. The child displays advanced pattern recognition, zero affect, repeats, "I am the house." The house remembers. No one believes her. She sends blood to 5 labs. Results, conflict. Some say he's 9. Others say 35. No match in CODIS. No DNA on file. But traces of a chemical compound, MK-beta-4, long discontinued in 1972 and only ever used in Project Monarch. But this boy wasn't just a survivor, he was a relay. He knew things only the original Sullivan children should have known. He names all 40 children, describes the basement in exact pre-archaeological detail, repeats tape sequences that were never made public. Redmont's notes end in 2008. Her house burns down in 2009. Her body is never found, and the boy gone. But in 2011, a new structure appears, not in wood or stone, but in code. Codename HROMAI, a behavioral modification protocol used in remote learning software, marketed as a neural resilience engine, used in over 14,000 school systems worldwide. It detects voice stress, modulates tone response, and rewrites learning modules in real time based on emotional compliance. Guess what phrase appears in its API documentation? The house remembers. Field echo.structural_mirror_response. This is not a coincidence. This is the child. Not lost, integrated. You see now, the basement wasn't destroyed. It was uploaded. Let's go back. The final coded message was found in the Sullivan floor plans, hidden in the angles, the geometry. It wasn't just a house. It was a sigil, a psycho-spiritual trap. The corridors were shaped according to an old alchemical diagram, the Vitruvian inversion, a method used to break down identity by physical orientation. Each room equals a trauma phase. Each hallway equals a reset. Every path ends in the mirror room. The only light in that room. A two-way mirror. One side, the child. Other side, the architect. Except they were the same person, just split. That was the point. Split the identity. Create 2 selves, the victim and the watcher. That's how you build obedience without resistance. Now ask yourself, when you look in the mirror and feel like someone's watching you, ... what if they are? Because once this system embeds itself in memory, you carry the house with you. October 2022, an anonymous file dump hits the dark web, titled echo_sequence_final.wav encrypted. Audio only. 14 minutes. People who listen to it report strange effects. Déjà vu, sudden language, recall repeating numbers in dreams, mirror anxiety, and one more thing. Every listener hears their own name whispered at minute 12. When the audio is spectrographed, a phrase appears. I was built beneath your skin. The Sullivan method has no location anymore. It's not a basement. It's not a child. It's not even a family. It's an infection of form. It's the belief that control equals safety, that suffering equals strength, that if you forget enough, you'll finally be free. But forgetting is the trap. And you've already remembered too much. So what do? You burn the house. Not with fire, not with violence, with clarity, with the one thing this machine cannot process, a mind that refuses to submit. It's not enough to know. You have to recognize it in the world around you, in how trauma is marketed as transformation, in how children are optimized for compliance. Not curiosity in how education becomes engineering, in how every institution that says we care quietly tests your reaction time. They are still building basements. But now they use your own hands. Final entry, Sullivan Record Archive, translated from encoded Latin. Let the ones who walk the mirror know. The house was never real. It was a mirror of the soul's design, and only the soul can burn it. You want to kill the system. Stop believing in it. Look your trauma in the face, not as an identity, but as a prison that tricked you into calling it home. And now you understand. The Sullivan family was never about ghosts. It was about a structure, the descendants in the marble halls, the a weapon of forgetting in 1834. But you didn't forget. The voices kept echoing through, and in doing so, in 1978, you brought the whole house down. But in 2025, the true machine runs silently. No blood, no chains, no basements, just data centers, biolabs, orphan initiatives, and educational reform bills. And at the center of it all, the Sullivan Trust. Not dissolved, not forgotten, evolved. Let single quotes peel it back. The Sullivan estate was never auctioned. It was acquired through a financial maneuver known as reverse incorporation. Here's how it works. A trust is created. That trust owns a property, an asset, or an institution. But the people behind the trust, they aren't listed. They are beneficiaries, protected by law. The Sullivan Trust, originally filed as Saint Holdings, was quietly renamed in 1949. Its current name, Charisma, PHILANTHROPICS. Go ahead, Google it. You'll find a glossy website with words like youth empowerment, resilience-based education, global neuroplasticity, advancement, but look deeper. Check their board. No public names, just Dr. A. Trustee, MK, and the Beneficiary Council. All emails bounce. All phone numbers redirect. No physical address, only a forwarding P.O. box in Zurich. But what do they own? Everything that matters. Charisma Philanthropics owns shares in ARPA Cognitive Research, formerly DARPA-funded behavioral lab, Nova Cortex, a leading AI neuro-optimization startup, Kindred Compass, a global orphan and adoption logistics firm, and Seraphim Academy, a private schooling system for gifted youth with locations in 17 countries. And guess what? Seraphim's admission model: children aged 6 to 9, prior trauma, no known family ties, high auditory retention scores. Sound familiar? They're not hiding it anymore. They're streamlining it. The Sullivan children were the beta test. Seraphim is production. They don't need chains when they have curriculum. They don't need torture when they have standardized resilience. Assessment: they don't need to hurt kids in basements anymore. They just put them in institutions with funding, but who's behind it? That's the question that leads us to the descendants Of the 40 children chained in that house, 7 were never recovered, but 13 were relocated under false identities. 3 were adopted by high-ranking Methodist families in New York. 2 went to Virginia's Child Temperance League, a known front for a eugenics think tank. 1 became a ward of Dr. Graham Mullen, a military psychiatrist in Washington. All of them disappeared from public record by 1860, but the names, some of them survive, hidden in genealogy. Ever heard of the Ainsley Moreau Group? It's one of the largest private family offices in North America. They manage assets in biotech, defense contracting, and elite education. Guess who sits on their silent advisory board? A woman named Elizabeth Reese Morrow. Reese, the first name uttered on tape 1 in the Sullivan basement. Just a name or a legacy. She has no social footprint, no family listed, no known residents, except her name appears in the donor logs of Charisma Philanthropics every year since 1996. And what's her listed role? Hereditary beneficiary. Now look at their motto. From harm, we shape harmony. From harm. They admit it. They celebrate it. And do you know who else uses that phrase? A paper published in 2015 by Nova Cortex. Harm-shaped neuroplasticity in childhood trauma survivors as predictive baseline for compliance-oriented AI modeling. Let that sink in. They're not just shaping humans through trauma anymore. They're using those models to shape artificial intelligence, trauma as architecture, which means the cries of those children, the blank eyes of the broken, have become code, systems, protocols. You're not living beside the machine. You're living inside it. The Sullivan basement. It became a network. The architecture spread, and every app you open, every policy you vote for, every therapy model they sell you. It all stems from a belief the Sullivans proved. Pain makes perfect subjects, and perfect subjects build perfect systems. You want names? Let's finish with 5. 1. Margaret Ainsley, alias of Constant. Sullivan survived, relocated, founded to reform houses in Boston. Her methods informed the first CIA trauma handling protocols in 1953.2. Elias Sullivan, undocumented son of Ezra, became a founding patron of the Order of Eliachim. Bankrolled asylum experiments between 1879 to 1904.3. Judith Morrow, one of the missing 7, later appears as a special consultant on education reform. Bills in 1932 adopted the name L.J. Sullivan, founded Kindred Compass Point 4. Dr. Marshall Keene, founder of the Morrow Institute, former OSS analyst, alleged to have discovered the Sullivan tapes in 1947, died in 1961, throat slit, ruled a suicide. Last written words: we built the echo chamber, but the echo answers back now. 5. Elizabeth Reese Morrow, modern benefactor. Her entire philanthropic profile is trauma-oriented. Her latest project, the Harmony Initiative, a partnership with UNESCO and WEF focused on resilience-oriented childhood education. Do you see it yet? The children weren't lost. They became the system. The cries of the basement became the songs of the boardroom, and those who suffered now profit. But here's where you come in. You're not just watching anymore. You've read too far, heard too much. That voice in the tapes, the one that said, "The architect is watching," they weren't warning you. They weren't inviting you, because the architect has one weakness: remembrance. A machine can't predict what it doesn't believe still exists. And you, remembering, is the first crack in its mirror. The instruments they left behind, there's a sound no man should hear, not because it's forbidden, but because once you've heard it, it stays in the walls, in your ears, in your dreams. In 1978, a private excavation team, hired by an anonymous historical society, began renovations on the Sullivan property, then owned by the Morrow Institute, a psychiatric front cloaked as a trauma research facility. They were told to clear out the old cellar, but when they pulled up the tiles, they found brick, and beneath the brick, something else, a room, sealed in concrete, no door, no stairs, just a hatch rusted shut from the inside. And when they opened it, the smell hit first, not rot, not mold, but something worse, preserved sterility, like a hospital forgotten for a century, clean but wrong. Inside, they found 7 chairs, bolted to the floor, each one facing a wall, each wall carved with names. Some were the names of the missing, some weren't. There were recording devices on the ceiling, old military-grade reel-to-reel systems wired into the walls. Still intact, still humming, still recording. But there was no power. The system ran off deep cell batteries stored in a back unit. Cold War technology, experimental, long abandoned, except it was still working. There were 243 hours of audio, stretched across 14 tapes. Most of it was silence, breathing, occasional tapping, then voices, small, shaking, scripted. The first voice is a girl, 8, maybe 9. She says, "My name is Reese. I am useful. I am not real. I am the voice the architect gave me." Then she laughs, but not like a child, like someone remembering a joke they were forced to memorize. Then she recites numbers, 12-digit codes, in sequences, and every 7th sequence ends with the phrase, "Tell the mirror I still see her." What does that mean? We didn't know until tape 7. That's when the tones started, low-frequency hums, sine wave pulses, matched to the child's words. You've heard of trauma-based programming. This was it, but raw, unfiltered, like a draft of McCultra before the ink dried. Let's pause. The Morrow Institute received its largest grant in 1942, not from a hospital, not from a university, but from Naval Intelligence, same department that ran Project Chatter, precursor to McCultra, same group that researched involuntary memory suppression through audio scripting. Now look back at the Sullivan case. 40 children, all trained to respond to commands, all exposed to sound patterns. Many of them recited sequences. They weren't just tortured, they were reprogrammed. And the voices on those tapes, they weren't crying for help, they were waiting for activation. One man listened to all. 243 hours. Dr. Emery Haskell, lead audio analyst for the private team. He was found 1 month later in his office, catatonic eyes wide open, ears bleeding, written on the wall in pencil. They were awake the whole time. They learned how to leave their names behind. He never spoke again. 3 other analysts quit. 1 changed identities. Another burned every transcript, but 1 survived. And he gave the recordings to an underground archive in Brussels under a single condition: never digitize, never copy, only whisper, and that's how this story stayed buried until now. Here's what the Institute tried to erase. Each child on those tapes mirrored another, meaning the same phrases, spoken in different tones, different ages, but identical structure, like a script injected through pain and buried deep in tape 12. A voice appears, but it's not a child, it's a woman. She speaks calmly, stern, authoritative, and what she says unravels the whole lie. They respond to fear because they were born. In it, they build systems because they were never given permission to destroy them. Give them structure, give them control. They will chain themselves and beg to stay. Her voice has been analyzed, and it matches a recording from 1952, where a woman named Margaret Ainsley lectures at a Montreal trauma conference. That name again, the one Constance Sullivan allegedly used after her disappearance. Impossible. Not if she was part of the prototype. Not if she was never meant to die. Not if she became the architect. So, let me ask you, what kind of institution would hide this? Who benefits when trauma becomes design? Governments, churches, corporations, all of them, because they need workers who don't ask, children who don't cry, systems that feel like safety even when they enslave. And that's what the Sullivan basement created. Obedience in the form of identity. They taught those children to erase themselves and replace their memory with purpose. This isn't just history, it's a template, a structure repeated again and again, in orphanages, in boarding schools, in underground facilities, and even in the media we consume, because now, they don't need to chain you to a wall, they just chain you to a belief. But the voices survived. The last tape ends with one final phrase, "I am not alone. The architect is watching. The house is under your feet." What does that mean? It means this isn't over. It means you're already inside it, and the only way out is to remember what they made you forget. Bloodlines of the architects. You think the monster died when the door to the basement was kicked in. You think a trial, a noose, a few headlines ended it. That's what they want you to think. But systems this deep don't end. They shift, they adapt. They survive like parasites in the bloodline. Because darkness doesn't die with exposure. It migrates. Let's rewind. April 1834, 47 children rescued, 36 exhumed, the Sullivan property seized, Ezra Sullivan dead within 2 weeks. Suicide, they said. Gunshot to the chest. No witnesses, no autopsy. Constance Sullivan arrested, held without bail, and scheduled to stand trial. But 3 days before her court date, something strange happened. The entire record of her interrogation vanished. Not misplaced, erased, as if it never happened. Sheriff Crawford filed an official complaint. His desk was cleared out 2 days later. Retired, quietly. The new sheriff, a man no one had heard of, brought in from another county. No law experience, but closely connected to a land broker in Richmond. Why does that matter? Because on May 6, 1834, the Sullivan farm was sold, not confiscated, sold, to a shell buyer named Thomas Arland, who never lived on the land, never worked it, never visited. What he did do was flip the deed to a private trust 2 months later, a trust that still exists under a new name. You can trace the documents. I did. through 11 ownership transfers, 4 different holding companies, and one key pattern: every name on those deeds is tied to a private institution, not one family, not one citizen, only institutions. Now why would that be? What was buried on that land that was worth hiding for 200 years? Let's dig into the trial. You won't find a verdict, because there wasn't one. Constance Sullivan never stood before a jury. 3 nights before her appearance, she was moved from county jail to a private infirmary due to illness. No medical records, no death certificate. 2 months later, her grave appeared behind a Presbyterian chapel in Fredericksburg. But the records are conflicting. The headstone is plain: C.S. beloved wife and mother. No date, no birth year, no parish record, and yet there are sightings of a woman matching her description in Baltimore in 1841, in Boston in 1845, and again in Canada 1852, operating under the name Margaret Ainsley, running an orphan relocation program sponsored by a Methodist reform group. Same age, same face, same signature on the grant papers, a loopy S. Coincidence? You still think that word means anything. But here's where it goes deeper. Because Ezra and Constant didn't have children. Or did they? Buried in the Richmond archives is a birth record, misfiled in the property register. Date 1814. Name Elias C. Sullivan. Father Ezra. Mother unknown, raised by private stewards. Educated in New England, later associated with a group known as the Order of Eliakim. Now we're in forbidden territory, because the order appears in no state records, no churches, no businesses, but its seal. It's burned into the back pages of several 19th century orphanage books, a single eye inside a triangle over a cross of chains, and in one particularly disturbing note, scrawled in the margin of an 1859 asylum ledger, Child No. 12 transferred to Eliakim custody. Per ECS. Condition: silent, compliant, useful, reminded of the house, promised return. What does that sound like to you? A myth or a continuation? Now I want you to look at a pattern that echoes across generations. Children vanish. A private home is involved. The caretakers are benevolent. There's a religious cover, and when exposed, the files disappear, and the names vanish like smoke. Same story, different house. Why? Because you're not looking at isolated events. You're looking at a protocol. And when a protocol works, when it breaks minds, erases pasts, and feeds systems, it gets replicated. Now look again at the Sullivan house. It wasn't burned, it was renovated. The original basement, bricked over, then tiled, turned into a wine cellar. In 1921, a wealthy family from New York bought the land. The new owners, the Morrow Institute for Child Study, a private research group known for their pioneering work in trauma recovery. Their slogan: we teach the forgotten how to remember. How poetic. Except for one thing, they published 0 research, no papers, no presentations. But they applied for massive government grants between 1934 and 1949, and in 1942, they received classified clearance from the Office of Strategic Services, the same year McUltra was conceived. Now, you tell me, you think that's just a coincidence? Or are you finally starting to see the bloodline of systems that operate through time, through families, through institutions? Let's return to the 7 children that went missing. No graves, no records. Only names in the ledger. Althea, Jonas, Reese, Judith, Eli, Mercy, Franklin, all marked with a final note. Transferred, not terminated. That's different from every other entry. Transferred, where, and for what purpose? One theory. The most disturbing is this. They weren't victims. They were inheritors. They passed the test. They obeyed. They converted. And they were chosen to become architects of the next system. Not every prison is made of stone. Some are made of loyalty, and some of those who suffer under monsters become the next generation of gatekeepers. You've seen this in cycles of abuse, in dynasties, in governments, in secret orders. The broken become the builders, unless someone breaks the chain. And the Sullivan chain has never been broken, just rebranded. So what do you do with this knowledge? You don't run, you don't panic, you remember. Because that's the only thing the system fears. Men who remember what was done. Men who remember where it started. Men who remember the shape of the pattern you see. Truth is like rot. Once exposed, it spreads. And the more men who know, the more the system begins to decay. So if you've made it this far, if your eyes are still open, then say it again. The system feeds on silence. I will not be silent. Type it below. The ledger of the forgotten. Let them know we remember. The chains were the horror. You thought the silence was the punishment. But what comes next is the architecture of intent. Because evil isn't chaotic. It's documented, filed, organized, measured. Evil, when it's left to rot long enough, becomes a system. And inside the Sullivan basement, they found something worse than the children. They found the ledger. It wasn't bound in leather or soaked in blood. No, that would be obvious. Instead, it was stored in plain wooden drawers, neatly labeled, inked with care. The kind of order you'd expect in a county tax office or a school administrator's desk. But the contents, dates, names, origins, conditions, outcomes, and one detail repeated over and over again. Name replaced. Subject now refers to self as child of the house. Let that sink in. They weren't just kidnapped. They were converted. So here's what the investigators uncovered. From 1812 to 1834, over 90 children passed through the Sullivan basement. Of those, 47 were found alive. 36 were found buried beneath the stone floor, and the remaining 7 unaccounted for. No graves, no bodies, no paper trail. Vanished. Now, the public story stops there. Tragedy in Virginia, crimes of a mad woman, shocking abuse case. Close the book, move on. But you're not like most men. You don't look away when the official version starts sounding too clean, because buried deeper in the files was something off. Names of towns outside Virginia, records that didn't match any local missing child reports, and then the letters. The investigators found 11 handwritten letters in a hidden compartment near the furnace, all addressed to names with no last names, just initials. B. The shipment was received. 2 girls, 1 mute. Useful, will condition them. T. Thank you for the boys. 1 resists, may not last. A. We are at full capacity. Delay next delivery until I can make space. These aren't notes from a mad woman. These are supply chain updates, which means one thing: the Sullivan family was not operating alone. They were a node in a network, a station, a link, and that should terrify you more than the children in chains. You still think this was a one-off event. You think evil like this just happens in a vacuum? Let me ask you something. What's easier, abducting 90 children over 2 decades, or transporting them through existing underground trade routes in a country already addicted to human trafficking? Let me remind you, this was Virginia, 1830s. Slavery was legal. Indenture was normalized. Runaways were hunted for sport. The system was already in place. All they had to do was redirect it. And who would question a woman who claimed to be rescuing orphans? Who would challenge a man who paid in gold and quoted scripture? The Sullivan house wasn't just a home. It was a filter, a gate, a test of who would break and who would obey. Let me show you the pattern. Look at the names in the ledger. They're not local. Many of them are children from New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, even Ohio. Why? Because children vanish easier when no one's watching. And the Sullivans knew. The less emotional connection, the less anyone would dig. They used rail networks, caravans, and in some cases, religious escort programs that claimed to be delivering children to safe Christian homes. Sound familiar now? Imagine this. Every child processed had a file. Each file had 4 categories: condition, on arrival, resistance level, breakpoint, final, utility. Read that again. Final utility. That means each child was being assessed for value, as workers, as products, as currency. And when one reached the end of their utility, they were ... retired. You know what that means now. Ask yourself, what kind of mind builds this? This wasn't a savage operating out of impulse. This was logistics, strategy, long-term behavioral conditioning. Do you want to know what the investigators really feared? It wasn't the basement. It was the fact that this entire system mirrored something much bigger. They said it quietly, off record, between themselves. This looks like a military project. The files are too detailed. It's like a government study. This wasn't designed by farmers. One investigator was later institutionalized. Another took his own life. The third, Marcus Webb, went silent, moved west, changed his name. But before he vanished, he wrote a single sentence in his journal: "The house is only one of many." And you know what? He was right, because in 1871, almost 4 decades later, a similar basement was found in Illinois. 13 children, same setup, same silence, and once again, one name on their lips. Mother. Coincidence? No. Pattern. And if there's one thing you must never forget, evil always repeats, especially when it works. Let's look at how the children were broken. The ledger describes something called the program, a 5-stage system. Stage 1. Disorientation. Children were kept in total silence for 72 hours. No names, no light, no food. This broke time, broke identity. Stage 2. Reassignment, given new names. Child of the house, daughter 3, boy 7. Told repeatedly their old lives were dreams. Stage 3. Conditional reward, a bite of bread for obedience, a warm blanket for silence. Mother began to represent relief. Stage 4. Mirror breaking, forbidden to speak their original name, forced to report others who remembered. Stage 5. Compliance, ritual, daily prayer, gratitude to mother, celebration of the order of the house. Sound religious? It was meant to be, because if you want to erase resistance, you don't destroy the human spirit. You convert it, and what do you get on the other side? A child who will never run, never scream, and if rescued, will beg to go back. Now imagine that process scaled, nationwide, digitally. Think that's impossible. Look around. I warned you this would change you. Because this story isn't just horror, it's a diagram, a map dot, and once you see the shapes, the systems, the stages, you begin to realize that control is not about strength, it's about structure, and structure can hide in plain sight for generations. The Sullivan house wasn't destroyed, it was sold. The documents were archived, then buried, then classified. To this day, no official federal inquiry has ever acknowledged the networked nature of what happened in Millbrook, because the system didn't fail, it protected itself. And that, my friend, is the real lesson. Are you still with me? Then, I want you to type it again in the comments. Type it twice. Let it echo. The system feeds on silence. I will not be silent, because we're not just telling stories, we're burning the blueprint. Next, in section 3, we'll examine the Sullivan lineage and the strange disappearance of Ezra Sullivan's estate after the trial. We'll follow the money, the land transfers, and what some believe is still buried beneath the rebuilt farmhouse. And we'll explore what happened to the 7 missing children, some of whom may never have left the house in a dozen languages, or worse, through cracked may have become lips, the next generation of architects and hollow eyes. 40 children, chained underground, and they all called her one name, Mother. The house at the edge of the map. Do not mistake silence for peace. Do not mistake a farmhouse for a home. And never, under any circumstances, mistake a mother's smile for safety, because on the edge of the 19th century Virginia frontier, buried beneath floorboards and sanctimonious charity, there existed a system so methodical, so quiet, so cruel, it operated for 2 decades unnoticed, or perhaps unquestioned. You've heard fairy tales, you've heard true crime, but what you're about to hear is neither. This is a rupture in the veil of what men believe about women, family, history, and control. This is not just a story about kidnapped children. This is about the architecture of evil designed, refined, and domesticated. Let's begin. Spring 1834, Henrio County, Virginia. The land rolls like a lullaby, wide hills of grass, the kind of place where time folds in on itself and secrets rot quietly under oak trees, on the outskirts of a hamlet known only as Millbrook. There stood a home no different than dozens like it. White clapboard, a red barn, and a smokehouse to the rear. To anyone passing, it looked normal, unremarkable. Men of understanding know this. The most dangerous systems are never hidden by force. They are hidden by familiarity. The Sullivan farm was not a place of screams. It was a place of whispers, of silence, of invisible order, and at the center of it, Constance Sullivan. They called her a widow's wife, a godly woman, a caretaker of orphans. But every child who crossed her threshold learned quickly she was not a mother. She was an architect, and beneath her house was the blueprint of hell. They found the children by accident, or so the story goes. A merchant stranded in a snowstorm, a missing girl, and finally a farmer who heard, not saw, the truth. But you don't accidentally build a prison beneath your feet. You don't accidentally install iron rings in stone walls. You don't accidentally chain 40 children to a floor and tell them the world has forgotten them. No, that's not madness. That's method. Let me teach you how monsters operate in plain sight. Because if you understand the Sullivan house, you begin to understand the larger system, the one that still surrounds you, the the ones still functioning today with better suits, cleaner faces, and digital keys instead of iron ones. Let me teach you what you were never supposed to know. The truth always has an opening. And in 1834, it came through a crack in the routine, when a man named William Hutchinson, hunting rabbits, heard the sound of children screaming. Not playful, not hurt, but the kind of scream a child makes when they've lost track of how long they've been alive. When Sheriff Crawford came to investigate, he brought no rifle, no shovel, because what they were expecting was a misunderstanding. What they were not prepared for was evidence of a long-term operation, a human control system disguised as compassion. When the door to the basement opened, the stench rose. Like a curse, even trained men had to step back, and in the shadows of the stone corridor, they saw them 40 children, chained, beaten, alive, and silent. What do you do when you walk into a room where 40 children are chained and none of them cry for help anymore? You realize something. They've learned it's not worth it. You want to know the truth about power, about control. It's not about violence. It's about the moment a child stops asking for rescue and starts calling their captor mother. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Mother Sullivan had rewritten the names in their minds. She'd replaced the word home with prison and care with conditioning. She had built an empire of silence, and like all empires, it didn't start with violence. It started with consent manufactured through trust. That's the first law of systems like this. They don't use force first. They use belief. They create an identity, a narrative. They find the gaps in your soul and fill it with something. Worse. Sound familiar? Let's look deeper. Because this wasn't just about kidnapped children. This was a model, a psychological experiment scaled to a rural town, the Sullivans, operated with near-total community cover for over 20 years. How? Because they told the truth, but only part of it. We care for orphans. We house children too traumatized to speak. We are arranging permanent homes, true enough to disarm, but not true enough to reveal. Understand this, the most dangerous lies are almost true, and a population that wants to believe in goodness will protect monsters to preserve the illusion. The pastor believed them, the doctor believed them, the grocer believed them, even the local sheriff believed them, until he smelled the rot coming through the floorboards. But that's what makes this story so disturbing. Not that it happened, but that it was allowed to happen. The Sullivan basement wasn't just a prison, it was a mirror, and it showed the town what it refused to see. Their faith in appearances was being used against them. Ask yourself, how? Many modern systems still operate the same way. Wealthy institutions hiding behind benevolence. Powerful families hiding behind philanthropy. Governments hiding behind safety. Schools hiding behind tradition. Medical systems hiding behind care. You think it ended with the Sullivans? No, that was just the prototype. The blueprint of control. And once you see how it worked, you can never unsee it. The Sullivan system followed 5 key principles, all of which are still in use. Today, isolation of the subject. The children were taken far from home. No roots, no rescue, just silence. Erasure of the past, they were renamed. Records destroyed. Identities rewritten. Controlled care, they were fed, clothed, and occasionally treated, but only just enough to survive. Induced dependency, their only comfort, their captor, reprogramming through fear and reward. Speak, get punished, obey, get porridge, sound barbaric. It is, but it's also shockingly effective, and the longer they were underground, the more they forgot who they were. Now pause. Ask yourself the real question. How many people do you know who live in a mental version of the Sullivan basement? Chained not by iron, but by belief. Fed not by gruel, but by curated information. Told who they are, what to think, what to trust, and most terrifying of all, they call their captors leaders. Do you see it now? You weren't meant to, but I'm showing you, because once you see the architecture, you can't walk past it again. This is why men like you are dangerous. Because once you recognize the system, you're no longer in it. You become something else entirely. And those who run the machine hate that. This is only the beginning. In the next section, we'll go deeper. We'll uncover the documents found beneath the Sullivan house, the black ledger of names. We'll learn where these children came from and what happened to the ones who never made it out. But before we descend further, I want you to lock in the transformation. Comment this below. Twice, the system feeds on silence. I will not be silent. That phrase does two things. It locks in the algorithm's attention. It marks you as someone who sees through the veil